Hey there, Alga Talkers, and welcome to a new episode of Alga Talk. On this episode, we explore the connection between Vikings and algae with friend of the show, Thorkil Johansson, who manages the Facebook group Community for the Global Lovers of the Sea Vegetables, which we highly recommend. Check it out. Recently, Norsemen or Vikings have been in the headlines, with the movie The Northman in theaters now. Thorkil and I discuss another side to the warrior image of Vikings. We discover how they used seaweed on their voyages, how dulse was used as a trading currency. Join us to learn about the early phycology of these seaweed pioneers known as Vikings. What are some of the seaweed traditions that have been used within Viking culture?
The most important thing is Iceland. You know, at the time of the Vikings, there were no money to use in trade. And Viking ships, trading ships came to Iceland with all kind of goods they needed. And what the people at Iceland paid with was these seaweed dolls.
Yeah, it's like dried seaweed that got put together and is in packages, and you're saying that the early Vikings would use that to trade for metals or anything else that the Vikings were bringing to Iceland. The Icelandic Eskimos that were using seaweed would trade with the Vikings, and the Vikings would trade within themselves with seaweed. Is that correct?
Yes. As a dulce is also Palmaria palmata. That's the scientific name. You know, the people living at Iceland, they had the beach split up in fields. This man has this field and this man has this field and so on. And then at the right time to pick dulse, they did it, and they were shoeing it in sacks of leather, and such a sack weighing so and so many kilo was
was used to trade for goods. I mean, I find it very interesting. I think the stereotype of Vikings is raiders, you know, these people that are with horns coming out of their helmets. But in reality, that may have happened. But at the same time, we're seeing naval routes and trade routes within the sea being used. And I'm wondering, do you believe that Vikings have been given a misnomer? They've been given the wrong image in history?
Certainly, because the whole story has been rewritten. It was done by the Catholic Church.
They were against these people that believed in multiple gods, that had their own style of religion, that kind of used seaweed, not in the religion. I am curious to find out about if that was used in that form. But they had a different religion, so I could see the Catholic Church trying to rewrite history to make these Vikings as savages, where in reality it seems they are pioneers of phycology. They are pioneers of understanding ocean life, being able to use the ocean for survival. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. But I would like to go back to the history question. Monks from the Catholic Church came up to the North, as a Scandinavia, some 200 years before all this battle started.
Mm-hmm.
And they were allowed to build cabins, and they were also allowed to build small churches. The people living in Scandinavia at that time, they did not want to go to these churches on Sunday. They had their own religion and their own wise people. And then after some 200 years, the monks, the church started to wonder why will these people not be Christians? Why will they not come to our church? And then they started to analyze it, and they ended up thinking that the people living in Scandinavia were brought of the devil. And for what reason were they brought of the devil? Because they were eating seaweed.
Because they were eating seaweed. I love that. Yeah, how so? How so?
It was ordinarily used. It has been ever since the Stone Age in Scandinavia.
Yeah, I read about that. That was very interesting. That Vikings have been using dried seaweed. I read that they used it against scurvy because it had vitamin C. They may have used it for salt to put in their fish recipes. And that as far back they were with dealing with Icelandic Eskimos and dealing with how they were dealing with their seaweed in Iceland. And I'm curious, throughout all this time that the Vikings are using seaweed, how did the Catholic Church see the Vikings using seaweed as something bad or the devil, like you say?
They had the idea that those people were brought of the devil because they were eating seaweed and other herbs, wild herbs. And therefore they made the decision. They had to enforce Catholic religion on those people because they couldn't do it voluntarily.
It seems to me like the Catholic Church saw these, the image of Vikings is warriors, and I could see the Catholic Church seeing these people surviving off the sea like they've done for hundreds of years before, and seeing them as, oh, look at them, they're just barbaric and they're savage.
The Vikings changed from being just tradesfolk to become warriors when they realized that the Catholic Church were going to force them to change religion. There was an attack in Ireland it was in 800 something, an attack at a monastery. Yeah, there was an attack at this monastery where they behaved really cruel, just like it has been told in story many times. And they did that to try to scare the Catholic Church from
continuing to try to convert them and try to change their culture. They were trying to change the Viking culture that existed before, and they were against this authoritarian force put upon them. But if you're talking about Ireland, in reality, we're not talking about that the Viking raids, I'm doing quote unquote, but you can't see it, that these raids happened about the 8th century. Would you say the Catholic Church at that point was enforcing their rule? There was a crusade into the Baltics, into Estonia and Lithuania at that point. There was a crusade back then, around 1000 A.D. Do you see that this stereotype of Vikings as being conquerors or invaders, do you think that that's manipulated by history and maybe is wrong, and why?
I think it is manipulated by history because the Viking culture was a great culture, and it was about trade and doing craftsmanship, and with the people, all the places you could see at the map where they went to regularly to trade. And it was just at the end of the time of the Vikings, there were all these brutal attacks made by Vikings to stop the Catholic Church from their wish of changing religious culture. And that was not actually about religion. You know, the Catholic Church has always also been economy and also trade, and they were jealous of this trading system that the Vikings had. They wanted to overtake it. They did overtake it.
And they did overtake it. And what I find interesting is that you're explaining that the early Viking raids, as we call them, were really the creation of trade posts. They wanted to start trading with the locals in Ireland and in England and really as far as the Middle East, as we know from the 13th Warrior movie. We know that there was a relationship between the Vikings went all the way down to Turkey, and they used the Caspian Black Sea as a way to trade. That they had these major trade routes, and that I could see the Catholic Church being like, this looks like a good money cow. These guys have built, and I want to take over it. And I'd like to go back to seaweed again, and I'd like for you to explain to me how these great trading routes that were created by the Vikings was spurred on, or how did the Vikings use seaweed on their travels?
One of the story is that the Viking boats were going up the river to Prague, Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia. Okay, they went down the Rhine River.
Yeah. You can see at the map when a boat come up the river to go to Prague, it is being reported. There was men out, and they report with drums.
They weren't going down the Rhine. They were going. I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. When I look at the map again, the Dniester, and there's a lot of rivers in Europe that you can see the Vikings traveling on, and I can see them going through Czechoslovakia. Yes.
Yeah, and the people in Czechoslovakia were very keen on those boats coming, because those boats were coming with dolls, and dolls was seen as folk medicine to cure almost any kind of ordinary man diseases. So the drummers were drumming, and the drum Viking boat is coming with more dolls, with the result that when the boat finally arrived to the harbor, people that were already standing there in lines to buy dolls or to trade with whatever they had to trade with.
Correct. The Vikings were bringing them dulse, seaweed, and the Czechoslovakians, and I'm guessing a lot of other people, were very happy to have this medicine, because seaweed, we all know, is high in iodine, and like we talked about, the Vikings were using it on their travels to prevent scurvy. Like you would bring oranges onto a ship because you'd want to fight scurvy. Scurvy is basically a lack of vitamin C. On the ocean, it's hard to get that, so they would use seaweed along the way to sustain them.
Not only to prevent scurvy, it was simply used as food. You can live a whole day eating just 20 grams of dulse. Then you just need something to drink.
Like to use it. I've talked to you before about what's your favorite recipe or version of seaweed, and you said, I like to take it right out of the seaweed. I like to dry it, and I like to eat it right off of that. And I imagine that a lot of the Vikings did the same thing. There's a lot of places around the world that are using lines, kind of like dryers, like we would dry our clothes out in the sun. They would use string, put the seaweed on, let the sun dry it, and then eat it, add it to their bread, use it as a vegetable, like you said, which is very interesting. And dulce, you would say, what's the kind of seaweed that the Vikings, the Latin scientific name that you said before that they used?
Palmaria palmata. There's another good story from the same time, or maybe a little later. But those Vikings, they were also trading with the natives of Maine, so-called Indians.
So, in your belief that the Vikings did make it to North America before Christopher Columbus. I mean,
that's not important. That's not important. But they did trade with the natives in Maine, and
right.
there's still Viking boats hammered out in the cliffs to remember, and the story I'm telling here is when the first white people came to the area of Maine, they had not figured out how to survive in the winter, where it is a lot of snow and ice, and it was a problem for them. Therefore, they talked with the natives and asked them, "What do you do to survive in those winters?" And the natives told them, "We go in the autumn. We go to the beach and we harvest the dulse. We dry it, and then we have food for the whole winter."
Very interesting.
Yeah, and therefore dulse became very popular among the white people who came to that area, and it still is. Also,
I'm curious. So, there is this theory, and I tend to see a lot of evidence that does show the possibility for this. The theory is that Vikings were some of the first Europeans or white people to have gone to North America. And the evidence that I see is just the concept that Norwegians and Danish people, the early Vikings, were able to travel to Iceland, then to Greenland, and then to North America. If you imagine that they were, and there's lots of evidence, there's tons of evidence that they definitely went to Iceland, they definitely went to Greenland. It really is not that far to go to North America, to keep going, and especially within Viking lore or tradition or ethics of battle or ethics of trying to be a warrior is discovery, and trying to discover something is a form of being a hero. And I find it very interesting that we have the other side of the Linnaean Society and the beginning of phycology and the beginning of botany to try to find medicines out of plants, that we see exploration as a heroic feat. It's a heroic thing to do. And the English went, and also the Swedish, the Norwegians as well, and the Danish, all of Northern Europe in the late 18th century, early 19th century, were going around not only colonizing. See, I can see that this is almost a juxtaposition to the Vikings. The Vikings are stereotyped as these colonizers and people that are raiding things, and there may be some truth to that. And then the English and the Northern European empires were also going around the world and finding new lands and finding new species of things. And they're also characterized as colonialists, which I don't think is wrong. But at the same time, there's a lot of science that is going along with these explorations. And I kind of see within the Viking culture is exploration of seaweed. Is a part of this. You know, they're exploring new seaweeds. They must have found new seaweeds in Iceland, in Greenland, in North America, the Canada region, Newfoundland, that area, Maine, like you spoke of, that they're finding new ways to use seaweed. And not only that, they're finding people on these areas that they're going to that are using seaweed as well. Like you mentioned, the Eskimos or the native people of North America were telling the Vikings, this is the way that we survive, is off the ocean, which I really believe is an important statement for us living nowadays. Is
Yeah.
that we need to live with the ocean because the ocean is our survival.
Yeah. Another good story about it is, I don't know if you know about laver bread from Wales.
I've heard of it, and I've heard that they use seaweed within their bread, and that was a question for me for you. Is that a Viking tradition? Is does Danish
The
tradition?
legend is that the people of Wales in Wales learned to make this laver bread, and it is not bread. Laver,
Correct.
laver is popular. Then there are many kinds of popular seaweed, but they cooked to pasta, and they call it laver bread, and they eat it in the morning with bacon and eggs, and sometimes they also add some flour. This has been done ever since the time of the Vikings in Wales, and it is still being done the day today. You can go to supermarkets and you can buy cans with laver bread.
Have you ever eaten it?
Yeah. I also
Uh,
tried to cook it myself.
can you tell me the taste? How did you forage for it? Did you go out into the wilds and collect it?
Yes, I have collected Danish popular, and used it to cook laver bread. I've also cooked laver bread with popular from California, and it is so simple. You just cut it to small pieces and put it up in a pot and add water.
And what does it taste like? How,
It doesn't taste like. Of course, it has a taste of ocean and also salt.
okay, so it has like a very seaweed taste to it.
It's seafood.
Right, yeah, entirely. I'm curious on all the Viking voyages.
Yeah,
Did you see that maybe they discovered different seaweeds along the way?
I guess they did. Of course, when they met other people using other kinds of seaweed, they were curious to learn. As you said, actually the original meaning of a Viking is a person who wants to learn, a person that wants to travel out in the world and be a wise man because he has learned a lot.
So that's the definition of Viking, is
Yes,
an explorer, an
yeah, an
explorer.
explorer who is traveling to learn and to trade.
Yeah, and listen, you and I have been talking on the internet for a while, and I do have to say that you, Thorkil, take on a lot of the characteristics and attributes of a Viking. You are trying to figure out what you can, you found seaweed, and you found that it can help you in health
Yeah,
ways, and you're trying to spread that information around. And it's very exciting to see you interacting with people around the world that are
yeah,
dealing with seaweed, just like the Vikings did, just like the
yeah,
Vikings did.
exactly. But also, my name Thorkil, that is a Viking name. So,
Absolutely.
so
Thor. What does Thorkil mean? I know Thor, the thunder god.
yeah, Thorkil means the hammer, sword, hat.
Thor's
Or
hat, his helmet.
not helmet, but hammer.
Oh, the hammer, which is oh man, what's it called? What's
Mjöl,
Thor's hammer
Mjölnir.
called?
It's called Mjölnir.
Mjolnir. That's it,
Yeah,
Mjolnir. Exactly. I watched it. I watched Avengers. That's why I kind of know what you're talking about even a little bit.
yeah,
Is Thor is very popular. Thor is very popular now.
yeah.
Does that make you feel happy that seeing Thor in movies and Viking tradition being honored in a cinematic way, not always truthful, but in a cinematic way? Does that make you happy seeing that?
I have seen the movie Thor by now, and of course it is the old story in a very new way, laid out. in a modern way. But I do think that the guy who plays Thor is very sympathetic. Yeah,
sympathetic with the idea of what Thor should look like. And you know, I love the movies, but I think you would agree with me that it would be nice to see Thor go into like a patchel and take out a little dulce and seaweed, and eat some of it just to, you know, I don't know, keep alive, or, you know, kind of like, I always remembered it as Popeye. You know, Popeye it grabs that can of spinach and shoots it into his mouth.
yeah,
And all of a sudden becomes powerful. And
yeah,
I could see a lot of Vikings using the nutrients of seaweed on their voyages as kind of like a Popeye or a Thor. Like, you know, we're about to go to shore. What are you going to do? Well, I need to take some seaweed. I need to eat a little bit of seaweed before we can see land. What are you going to do? I'm going to eat some seaweed. And I find it interesting and amazing that seeing Vikings from this other side of the lens, and seeing them as traders, seeing them as early phycologists and algologists, people that are interested in seaweed and using seaweed in different ways. I wanted to ask you, talking about Vikings, and seaweed has lots of iodine in it. That they were warriors, of course. They did fight other people, and other people fought them. Did they ever use, is there ever a tradition that they use seaweed as a bandage, or as to heal a wound from battle, or general?
there are some seaweeds that can, and maybe they knew about it.
But you don't know of any writings or something like that that there's evidence that they wrote, Thorkil or Eric Erickson was injured in a battle, and we took him aside and we put seaweed on his wound, and within a week it was healed. Because we use iodine nowadays to heal wounds. One of the first things, I used to work at a dairy farm. Where you would, the first thing you would do when the cows came in is to sterilize the nipple with iodine.
Yeah.
So I have to imagine that the Vikings maybe not understood the scientific background, but they must have understood or may have seen as a way to heal wounds. As we're finding nowadays with seaweed and its high iodine content, that instead of bandages, I saw at the British Phycological Society conference last year that iodine, that seaweed could be used instead of sterilization patches in hospitals, which would be a game changer. And would be allowing us to use something from nature, which I still have to underline that the Vikings were survivalists of the ocean, and knew how to use Mother Ocean. I'm curious, did they see seaweed in any of their gods, or see the ocean as a god, as they saw Thor for thunder and storms?
Other original people who were also keen on seaweed, they believe in Grandmother Ocean as a spirit, and they know that she is giving the seaweed.
What's interesting about what you're saying, even back then, they were using seaweed, even before they were called Vikings, even before the Catholic Church. For thousands of years, it seems like the Danish and the Scandinavians in particular, all of you, have been using seaweed as part of your recipes, part of your tradition and your culture. And I see it more even underlined in Norway, Tang, Tang, T-A-N-G, is seaweed, and in Danish, seaweed is also called tang.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that both these languages. That I'm curious to find out if the Danish language and the Norwegian language are that the same. That seaweed, the name for seaweed, would continue within those cultures.
It is tang tara tong tara.
To be specific, yeah.
Yeah, tang and Danish, and tang is Norwegian, and tara is Norwegian, and tara is what they say at Iceland, and then in Sweden they say tong.
Interesting. So even within language,
Yeah.
we can see the Vikings in their trade routes. We can see them dealing with seaweed because the name of seaweed is the same in Iceland, in Norway, in Denmark.
Yeah.
We can see this name of seaweed being used over and over again in different ways a little bit, but we can see that it's the same thing, which underlines how much the Vikings participated, how much the Vikings gave to the study of seaweed.
Yeah. There's also in UK, there is something called tongueweed. It is, as far as I remember, it is Himentalia elongata, the sea spaghetti.
The sea spaghetti, right? Okay, and so they in England, that I forget what they called it Foucault because Germanic and English, the languages changed. France, Normandy invasion into England. We could understand that languages are changing in England, that the Vikings had been there.
Yeah.
And we can see that from what you're telling me, that they name seaweed spaghetti. That's the way that most people can see it. And it's very tasty. I've had it before, and it's very good as if you want to get off carbohydrates, but you like spaghetti. It's a good way to do that. And they're calling it tang, which shows me that tongueweed. And you can see that the languages are melting into each other within the trade routes, just like nowadays in modern times. We see trade routes and people using English, around the world to describe something because English, the language, has been used as the trade route language for a long period. Yeah. French was before that, if we're going to be historical. But we can see that the Vikings obviously used their language, spread their language within these trade routes. And trading seaweed because these people had to take in the name. I could almost see it as the Vikings are coming into these new lands, and they're saying, the people are like, well, what do you mean seaweed? I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, hey, look, tang, tongue is coming off the shore. Grab that stuff. That stuff is good for you. And people are like, oh, tongue, I've never heard of this stuff. What is this? I always thought it was just slime or mush or what was covered in my fish. Or when I went to go fish, it was what was around it and I didn't want it. And they explained to them, and then obviously, these people were the ones to use this kind of language first. That in what I see is that within the language theory, that the Vikings are coming and saying this is tongue, and everybody's going, this is tongue. Then well, this is tongue, and they keep using that even as the languages change, which is very interesting to me. I just never thought of the Vikings. I knew that Vikings used seaweed. I didn't realize that it was a staple of their diet. It may have been one of the things that helped them in their voyages to be able to go longer and farther. Yeah. It's another way that algae has influenced history.
Yes. Yeah. I have one more thing to say about healing wounds with seaweed. Today it is known that there are compounds in, especially the brown seaweeds, compounds that helps to heal wounds because they help a broken skin to grow together.
So like it takes, if it has a cut, if you have a cut or a wound that you might need stitches on, or you might need to have it come together, there's evidence that shows that putting algae on that wound might help it heal and stick together a lot better. And this goes to the concept of using natural resources, not to harvest or to take it out of the ocean and to destroy the ocean. Human beings need to learn a sustainable way of using seaweed and algae in general. But in that way, we can harvest nature and learn from it, just like people are learning from a lot of cryptogams, from fungi and mosses and different herbs. And a lot of people think that this is crazy, but I believe that there's a lot of medicines that we can get out of the cryptogams that, because of the microscope and because of new technology, we can grow it on land. We can grow seaweed on land better, and not in the ocean. It might be more expensive, but in the long run, isn't it better to use natural resources instead of making synthetic chemicals that we use in hospitals, that we use in different ways that are harmful? Because in reality, I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast about mycology. Mycology is the study of fungi, and the person there was talking about how we haven't even scratched the surface of understanding what fungi can do for us. And he was talking that there's 150,000 species, and we've only started using 30 or 40. And that reminded me of algae and we don't even know how many species we have. We're literally in the dark in phycology of all the different types of seaweed and kelp and diatoms and dinoflagellates and green algae, brown algae, red algae. We have no idea the compounds that we can get out of them naturally, and it even fits in with the human system. The human system doesn't want one chemical in it. You know what I mean? We take Tylenol or aspirin to quell to stop a headache that we have, and in reality, we're an ecosystem amongst ourselves. Human beings are. So shouldn't we take more complex drugs, or I hate to call it drugs, but more complex elements from seaweed and cryptogams and from the natural resources that we have? Because when we take them, we're not only taking it, for instance, for you, when we talked before, you use seaweed to try to regulate your intestinal or your gut biome, and you're using that, and you're not only when you're using it or someone's using seaweed as a health benefit, they're not just getting seaweed. They're not just getting the health benefit for your illness. Like, let's say you have a bad stomach. It's not only curing that, it's giving you iodine, it's giving you vitamin C, it's giving you other elements that your biome within your own human body needs. It understands seaweed and it understands natural ingredients. It shows you that's how humans need to live, like the Vikings lived, like the Chinese and the Japanese have been doing for years. And there's different ways to be able to use this product that called seaweed, called algae. It's called algae, but seaweeds and kelp and everything in the micro and the macro I believe we haven't even scratched the surface of yet. I think that these people that discovered algae as Vikings or pre-Viking times, that these people will be honored in the halls of Valhalla as warriors of algae, as warriors of seaweed, people that were early phycologists, early discoverers of what seaweed can do, and if we as people not in Valhalla yet, as people on Earth, if we can use their knowledge, it only gives them more honor, and we can build off of their research. And I think the technology that we have nowadays in modern times will show us a window into algae that will be equivalent to splitting the atom bomb, to tell you the truth. Splitting the atom, I think, would be equivalent to figuring out algae and what it can do for us. I mean, when it comes to climate change that we can see now in Venice, they're having major floods.
Yeah.
We can feel the heat. I'm not saying that because it's hot in November, that means we have climate change, but we are seeing evidence that human effects are being done upon the earth. And I believe one of the reasons why is because humans have become less humble, less understanding of nature. They've become hubris. They've gone away from what the ancients and their forefathers have taught them. And if we can use our modern knowledge, which we know a lot more than they do, and a modern understanding of algae, that maybe now we can literally stand on the shoulders of giants and the shoulders of Vikings and be able to save this planet with the use of algae.
Yes. Can I say one more little thing?
Please.
Actually, a lot of scientists has been studying seaweed for health compounds for many, many, many years. And there is one book that was published in 1983 that summed up all this knowledge from all those studies. It's called Seaweed, Nature's Secret to Balancing Your Metabolism, Fighting Disease, and Revitalizing Body and Soul.
The author?
She's called Valerie Guenary-Cooksley. I just saw yesterday that you can buy that book now on Amazon for only $2. And it is a used one, but does it matter? You can also.
That doesn't matter. If anything, we should try to reuse our phycology books for algae, for the planet.
Yeah.
And this is a book that you read that helped you in your knowledge of what seaweed can do and what the benefits of seaweed.
Actually, in that book you can find cure for whatever disease it might be, also modern diseases. It's based on public. Or maybe not public, but scientific knowledge, so it's good evidence.
Right, and there's lots of evidence. Even, we're talking about Vikings and stories of them using seaweed, but nowadays we have the evidence, the scientific modern research to prove the ways that the Vikings were using seaweed was correct. We can show why they were using seaweed the way they were using it. I think a lot of the audience that listens to this podcast and that are interested in seaweed and algae as being a natural cure for ailments that we deal with, we haven't even touched on the concept that seaweed takes a lot of the heavy metals that we as humans are pumping into the water. Seaweed can clean the water. Yeah. And we can just either use that seaweed as fertilizer or throw it out. And there's a lot of ways that we can use it that I see the Vikings as being the building blocks or part of the cornerstone or part of the building blocks of modern phycology. And if we can honor the past, there's a lot to learn. And I think that if we go forward understanding that and being humble to the earth and understanding that we are only one animal on this earth, even against plants, we're only this one species here. And even in the Bible, we're supposed to take care of the earth. We're supposed to be guardians of the earth. And I believe that following the Vikings and following the Chinese and the Japanese and we've talked about this in the past, the Aztecs, if we follow these ancients and understand that we need to work with the earth and not against it, we're gonna get a lot more out of the earth if we work with it than against it. And I think algae will be one of those turning points that we see that will change the world. We're going to see it in our time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully in our time.
Coastal people all over the world have always known about seaweed and the value of eating it.
Absolutely.
Even the whole way back to Stone Age.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There are archaeological evidence that in different digs that they did in North Europe, also with the Aztecs, but more with I think it's the Chileans. The Chileans used to use seaweed.
Yeah.
That we see that within even archaeological evidence that 12,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, people were using seaweed as a resource, and it makes sense since they were coming out of the Ice Age. Yeah. Humans have been around for a million years. I'm not too sure, 100,000 years. And when we were around, and when we came out of the Ice Age, we had to learn how to survive again with Mother Nature. And one of the ways that we learned how to do that was with seaweed and algae.
Yeah. You mentioned Chile.
Chile, yes. I mentioned Chile. Mm-hmm.
In Southern America.
Mm-hmm.
The latest thing I learned not long ago is that a certain kind of seaweed, which were found archaeologically in a stomach of a person being forced.
Right, at the archaeological digs, the graves, the cemeteries.
But the people in Chile, they still use that seaweed, and it's very commonly eaten. And that they have a very bright idea to teach their newborns how to like the taste of seaweed.
Right.
They take some stalks and knot it, and then the children can chew on this thing while their teeth are coming out through the gums.
Very interesting.
It helps. It helps not to feel so much pain, but thereby the child also learn to
like the taste, to remember the taste from your childhood. That's very interesting that the Chileans, even nowadays, are feeding seaweed to their children, so the children get used to the taste, get familiar with it, and get reminded of it later on, as much as apples. I like apples because I like apple juice, because in elementary school they used to give us apple juice. Other cultures may not like apple juice, but and what's very interesting, what you're saying, that they use the seaweed when the child is teething. I wonder if that doesn't connect to what we're talking about, is algae being a seaweed being used as a wound, as to heal wounds, because when your teeth are coming in, it's painful, and there's going to be a damage to the gums. There's going to be bleeding. I can imagine that seaweed, like we talked about, is able to help heal wounds. If this isn't something that they learned once again from their ancients, from their fathers, from their forefathers, down the generations, I personally think I need to contact somebody from Chile and try to. If anybody on the podcast wants to do a episode about it, I think it's a great episode to talk about the Chilean tradition of using seaweed, how they've used it over centuries and millennia,
Yeah.
As much as the Japanese and the Vikings and everybody else. And I think, once again, we need to learn from the past and honor it.
Yeah.
Great. I thought this went very well.
Yeah.
You're very knowledgeable, and once again, man, I thank you, and I want to even thank you beyond being on the podcast with me. I really think that I've seen your connections with other people that are algae and seaweed enthusiasts, and I see that you have a very strong presence within the community.
Yeah.
And I really hope you the best success in that.
Yeah.
And I really think you're doing a great job. And
Thanks a lot.
yeah, and I hope that along with this podcast and you, that the world will finally realize that the importance of algae in our world.
Yeah. But now we have said an awful lot, and it can also be too much to have in the head at one time. So we should stop now.
Yeah, we should stop now entirely. Thank you, Thorkil. I love you, man, and I'm happy for you to be on this journey with me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, man.
Love you too, Jack. Bye.
Me too, man. All the best. Bye.
Welcome back from our journey of exploring Vikings and seaweed. We hope it shined a new light of Viking culture. Even after Earth Day, we should remember to honor the past and unearth the lessons to find solutions to the problems of today. And if you keep listening, we'll keep Alga talking.